Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching the Oswegatchie Scat tutorials. Hopefully you've seen video 1 and video 2 at this point. Video 1 was the test of the samples, and 2 was the answers for you to check out. The videos are made with rubber replicas of Scat that you can buy at Acorn Naturalist. I'm sure they're available a few other places. They are little pieces of rubber, and they lack certain realistic details, such as the hair and the bones and the seeds and the plant material that you find from other critters. So I will tell you that the Scats are considered the wayside of the forest, because long after our critters' footprints are gone, there's often scat left behind. In different environments, the drier it is, the longer it lasts, the warmer it is, the faster it goes. They say in the jungle environments or even the rainforest, the scat is consumed by insects and other critters on an incredibly fast basis. If it is in the desert, scat often dries right out and will just lay on the land for it could be for months, or it could even be years, depending on where it was left behind. So, Scat is a pretty amazing process. There is so much to learn from Scat. I met a guy at a conference a few years ago, and he said 200 to 300 Scat samples in his house, and at the conference we were at, he only brought 50 to 60 with him. Now you're wondering, why would anybody in the world have that much scat? Well, the guy was a wildlife enthusiast. I don't know much about his biology background, but he said he had 50 different samples of deer scat, and it was all in different shapes and sizes and conditions, because like humans, even critters like deer, for example, their diet fluctuates throughout the calendar year. So, when they're living high in the hog, come summer, when there's lots of green around to browse, a deer will have probably plenty of food and lots of diversity within its scat. In the wintertime, probably not so much. So bears, their scat shifts dramatically from season to season. Coyotes as well. Things like skunks, which are part of the weasel family, I'm really not that familiar with their scat, but I'm sure it does change. Weasels are, I believe, omnivores, so they can have scat of different varieties. Number 1 was moose, relatively large little chunks there. Compared to the size of that quarter, they're pretty big. If you said deer, obviously it looks a lot like deer, but it's way bigger than that as compared to the quarter. There is deer later on in the file here. Fox. Now, if it was going to be fox scat, there's probably going to be rodent bones, and there's probably going to be a lot of hair in that, because that's primarily what they eat. Foxes are omnivores as well, so they could eat berries or other vegetation if they could find it. Notice it's tapered. That's important, because it would be filled with hair, and it would increase its tapered shape. This is goose, and it is green because it wants you to know that it's goose. That goose eat a lot of vegetation. And if you've ever been golfing, you've ever been at a resort with waterways, or even drive down the highway and something hits your windshield at 65 miles an hour, you'll notice as often bird scat is very green. Dog scat. Dog scat, obviously, a lot of varieties in the dog species, so what's left behind by a St. Bernard is dramatically different than something left behind by a Dachshund. And it's not hair. There's not much for organic materials or characteristics of it. Usually, if it's dog scat, you can tell it's dog scat pretty effectively. This one's very interesting. Very hard to notice it in the wild. Snake scat. Snakes are pretty private critters. They like a lot of cracks and crevices and shaded spaces to pass through, so they are not observed from above from predators. So it's very hard to find scat from a snake, but it makes sense. It's a long, tapered, small line of feces. Squirrel. Not really sure if a squirrel has 2 L's in its name, but it does today. Once again, rodents, mice, and squirrels, chipmunks, they don't usually deposit all their feces in one spot. So a pile like this is a little bit inaccurate. I think it's more about pellet size that's important. Bat. Same thing with bat. Now, bat's not a rodent. It does it does produce scat, It is small scat. Most of the time, it's important to find the scat underneath wherever the bat has been roosting or perching for the night. There's a few places around camp property that if bats are in there, you're usually going to find their scat the next day in piles on the ground. Porcupine. Now, porcupine scat is very easy to identify. It's usually in large piles, usually at the base of a tree. Porcupines eat tree bark and the growth tissue underneath that tree bark. Porcupines can usually only digest 2 or 3 different types of trees, and they usually would want to go for deciduous trees, not pine. Porcupine scat would be filled with wood chips. Raccoon, once again, another opportunistic omnivore, which will eat, things that pulled out of the river, things that pulled out of a dumpster, would eat berries, I'm not sure if they're fast enough to catch mice, but if they found meat, I'm sure they're going to help themselves to it. A rabbit, very small pellets, very similar to a deer, but smaller. Rabbits are in the rodent family, so there's going to be a lot of vegetation there. Rabbits can eat tree bark when they girdle a tree like a fruit tree, usually smaller trees. Rabbits are not always the best thing to have around, depending on what you're trying to do with your woodlot. This is a big pile right here, and it's very hard to gauge from the size of that quarter from photo to photo how it compares to the pile of scat in the video. This is a big pile of scat. This is bear scat. It's huge. So that's how most people identify this right here. The funniest sample of anything to pull out for a group of kids. Coyote. Now at Oswegatchie, most of the time when we find coyote scat, it's on one of the trails. It's on one of maybe the dirt roads like Bald Mountain Road. Very common on Bald Mountain Road to find it. Usually lots and lots of hair. It will sit in the landscape for quite a while. And usually in about a week it turns gray. Within about 2 weeks it's kind of chalky and gross. Bobcat. I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever seen bobcat scat in the wild. Up here at Oswegatchie, I know we've had bobcat pass through. I don't think somebody's seen one up here in about 20 years. But much like a coyote, they're surviving off of small mammals the majority of the time. I'm sure it would have lots of hair in it. Moose. Mice, little tiny scat piles. Usually you're not going to find a whole lot in one spot. You're usually going to find it a piece here, a piece there, all over the place if you find it. A lot of times old cabins will have scat throughout it. Mice, when they get into a population gets inside a structure, they can be there for quite a while. Deer, a little more accurate, especially compared to that quarter right there. I often jokingly call them wild Cocoa Puffs. So when we're out with a group of kids who doesn't really know what's going on around here, we look down, I remind them, yo, don't eat that. They are not wild Cocoa Puffs. We find a lot of deer scat in our grassy areas around here. This is an interesting one. Frog scap. Now, I've been swimming in the pond here at Oswegatchie probably a couple thousand times, and only on occasion have I ever seen organic matter floating through the water that looks like this. Maybe it was fish. Not really sure. Sometimes you find this along the pond's edge, but let's be honest, organic material like feces or scat in the water is going to dissolve relatively quickly. This is a hard one. Skunk. Skunks in the weasel family, so they are opportunistic, so they may eat vegetation, but most weasels are rather carnivorous. Skunk scat, it's like the little scat of any other omnivore. So most important thing is compare this to the coin behind it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have one for tracks. We're going to have one for bones of fur. These are a few simple videos that we were able to make using resources that we already have on the property. It's easy enough to take the photos and capture the footage and move it around and create these videos. So, we are trying to do more of this type of thing, so hopefully you enjoy. And if you need to find your own replicas, Acorn Naturalist is the easiest place for me to recommend finding these resources. If you got some serious dollars, there's some skull replicas that'll knock your socks off. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and have a great day.